Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked a little bit about what 2025 could hold for those two national championship teams. A lot of different questions, especially around that quarterback position. Will Julian Sayin and CJ Carr be able to step up in the way that they need, or will there be a little bit of a step back? After some really veteran quarterbacks got them there, could the young guys struggle just a little bit in 2025? But let's get into some superlatives. Let's talk about the CFP overall. There's a lot of different things I want to get to here, and a lot of it will have to do with Ohio State, as you can imagine. But overall, let's get into this, and let's start with the offensive MVP of just the entire thing, and I don't know if you can go anywhere else. Will Howard is very, very easily the offensive MVP as far as I'm concerned. His worst performance in the CFP was near 300 yards and only one INT against Texas. He was very, very good throughout this thing, had 8 touchdowns, only 2 picks throughout, and was one of those guys that we talked about him a little bit early on in the year and talked about, him coming over from Kansas State. People had questions. There's no doubt about that. You bring in Quinshon Judkins, you bring in Caleb Downs, and then you bring in a quarterback that won Kansas State a Big 12 championship, but didn't quite get them to the level that you would like Ohio State to get to. And people had some questions. They wondered, did they use all their money first and they had to find a quarterback at the end? Did they mess up this process? They didn't by any means. It was a guy that did not have a straightforward year, that was a little bit all over the place, that had those bad moments against Oregon, against Michigan, and was able to battle through. And that's really why you got this guy. It wasn't necessarily because of the outright insane ability. It wasn't necessarily because of the, ability to throw the deep ball or the ability to run the ball or anything like that. It was the leadership and the toughness that he had throughout his time at Kansas State, and it showed on the biggest stages. He played his best football that I've ever seen him play in these last 4 games, and when Ohio State needed him the most, he showed up time and time again. He was absolutely remarkable. It was a fantastic finish to what really was an underrated career before this year. There's no doubt about that. He was a guy that probably should have gotten more respect, obviously beat that TCU team that found their way to the title a couple of years ago, but this guy was absolutely remarkable throughout this CFP. He is the offensive MVP, and he's one of those guys that will live on for Ohio State lore forever. There's no doubt about that. He came in and did what they needed him to do, got a national title, and he walks out a champion. An incredible year that caps what was a really incredible career. Defensive MVP was easy as well. It is Jack Sawyer. This is a guy that didn't necessarily explode last night necessarily, but made a number of plays, and made a number of plays throughout this thing. Had 1.5 sacks against Tennessee, had 2 sacks against Oregon, had the big one against Texas, obviously, and this guy's a true freak of nature. There's no doubt about that. And the career overall didn't quite go to plan. He was an Ohio State kid at heart, and he wanted to beat Michigan. There's no doubt about that. He wanted to be the guy that was able to beat Michigan time and again and really take over that rivalry once again. Obviously, he leaves 0-4 against that team, but the reality is he's never going to have to pay for a meal in Columbus ever again. He is a guy that is a national champion, and he'll be able to wear that as a badge of honor the rest of his career. But remarkable player. Really made life just an absolute nightmare for every single offensive tackle that he played. All of the seniors and him came back, but this was the leader of this team. No doubt about that. He was the heartbeat of those seniors. He was the reason that a lot of them came back, including a couple that sounded like they might have been going elsewhere. Sounded like they might have been going to the NFL, and a couple of them might have been going to other teams. And then he found a way to get all those guys back in that room. They found a way to get on that field, and it was a special group. There's no doubt about that. Didn't necessarily hit the stride throughout the year that you wanted them to, but this guy definitely did. He was absolutely remarkable throughout this year. He made himself a little bit of money and became an Ohio State legend for absolutely forever. There's no doubt about that. Remarkable player, and definitely tore up the CFP as you would assume he would going into it. The coach of the CFP is about as easy as can be. You look at Ryan Day, we'll talk about him more tomorrow, but the job he's done after that Michigan game is nothing short of remarkable. It's a group that very easily could have rolled over, very easily could have said, well, we're 0-4 against Michigan, we're playing a Tennessee team that is very like Michigan in a lot of different ways, but they flipped the switch, and they flipped the switch in a way that we had not seen the entirety of the year, and we knew was somewhere in this team. We knew that level of play was somewhere around, but they never quite got there, and Ryan Day was a huge reason that they did, because he started coaching with anger. I don't know if anyone else noticed this the same way that I did, but this dude was mad the last month or so. There's no doubt. This dude was coaching mad. He was making speeches very mad. He was a guy that was obviously very upset with the way that the season has gone, with the way the last 4 seasons have gone against Michigan and against really everyone else. And you look forward, and now he's a national champion. He did an incredible job throughout the CFP, obviously on the field, but off the field maybe more importantly. Did an incredible job keeping everyone engaged, keeping everyone locked in, and you saw what happens when that entire team is locked in. They're a buzzsaw that just about no one is going to beat. The play caller of the CFP is Chip Kelly. There's no doubt about that. What a job he did with this group. And you come off that Michigan game, if I were to tell you that they were going to tear people to pieces with this offense, you probably would have called me crazy. There's no doubt about that. Because you look forward at what Chip Kelly has been able to do, and it's been insane. It's been a group of guys that you knew was special. You knew that Travion Henderson, that Jeremiah Smith, that Emeka Egbuka, that all of these guys were downright incredible players. But you didn't necessarily know what it looked like when it was all put together because we hadn't quite seen it. We hadn't quite seen every button get pressed the right way, and it could just be, attack Jeremiah Smith. It could just be throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith over and over and over again, but that was taken away in the Texas game. That was definitely taken away pretty much from the start where Texas was playing brackets the entirety of the game, and you had to find another way to go about business, and he very much did. The run game didn't necessarily get going in that game either, but they found a way to get the ball to Carnell Tate. They found a way to get the ball to Emeka Egbuka, and they made enough plays. It wasn't perfect by any means in that game, but outside of that, it was pretty close to perfect. They played some incredible football. He was hired to take the pressure off Ryan Day when it comes to play calling in these big moments, and he did that in a huge way over the last 4 games. Obviously, Ryan Day is still a huge part of this offense and helps with game planning, helps with all that type of stuff, but at the end of the day, this is a guy that really changed what this program was capable of, what this team was capable of throughout this year, and these last 4 games, he's been downright special. There's no doubt about that. He's been the best play caller in the country the last 4 games, and really throughout this year. You do wonder where it was during the Michigan game. There's no doubt about that if you're an Ohio State fan, but at the end of the day, he did dial it up when you very much needed it, and he coached some of the best football that he's coached really throughout his career, and it's been a remarkable career for this guy. The game of the CFP, you have to go all the way back to those quarterfinals when Texas played Arizona State, because there was a lot of really great games. With the semifinals and last night was absolutely incredible, but this was the one. Tons of swings of energy, multiple remarkable performances, including what I tend to consider the performance of the CFP from Cam Scadaboo in that game, and Texas found a way to get it done. In double overtime, Texas led by 14 at halftime, a couple of inopportune mistakes, a couple of coaching mistakes, a couple of missed field goals, and Texas was in a very bad spot. And then they get into overtime, they get a touchdown scored on them. Everyone's questioning if Texas is going to go home. And then the 4th and 13 happens, which could be the play of this entire thing. If Texas were to go on to win the national title, that would be a play that lives on the same way. A play that we'll talk about here in a second is going to live on for Ohio State. But overall, remarkable game that went all the way back and forth. When you talk about what Cam Scadaboo did in that game, he had 2 rushing touchdowns, a passing touchdown, over 300 yards total against a defense that looked like they could not get anything open. Looked like no one was going to find a way to get open. Even Cam Scadaboo early in that game did not look like the player that he looked the entirety of the year. And then something happened at halftime. Something happened when he threw up, really, where he just entirely took over that game. It was a remarkable performance from him, and we got the game of the year in Atlanta as far as I'm concerned. Maybe Ohio State, or maybe Georgia, Bama, or Ohio State, Oregon takes the cake just by a little bit, but this was very, very close at the very least, and it put them in a position where Texas moved on to the next round. There's no doubt about that, and they played an Ohio State team that obviously ended up being the just buzzsaw that they ended up being, but at the end of the day, this was the game of the CFP as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, a couple other ones came very close, and hopefully we get a couple more of these as we move forward throughout this 12-team CFP, but overall, remarkable game in Atlanta. Wasn't the national championship like the way we probably wanted it to be, but at the end of the day, was an incredible game, and Texas gets a double overtime win in what was just all over the place throughout that game. The unit of the CFP was the Ohio State D-line, and there were a number of I could have choose from the Ohio State group. I could have chosen these wide receivers who were downright incredible. Could have chosen the offensive line that really dealt with a ton of stuff and played ridiculously good football throughout this thing. And they had nearly 18 sacks in the CFP. They were one of the most disruptive groups in the final 4 games of the year. Every O-line they went up against did not win that battle. There was not a battle they didn't win throughout this thing. Ty Hamilton and Talik Williams in the interior were downright incredible. JTT and Jack Sawyer on the outside just dominated from start to finish. Kenyatta Jackson made a number of plays. It was a ridiculous group. And if you want to include the front seven in this group, if you want to include the linebackers as well, it was remarkable what this group did, what the pass rush of this group did, and really stifled everything but Riley Leonard's legs early on in this game. And then obviously they found a couple openings on the back end, but this defensive line just ate up this group. They ate up the Notre Dame group, they ate up the Texas group, and so on throughout these last couple of games. The Michigan offensive line has to feel pretty good about what they did, and they probably got eaten up pretty good in that game. So overall, this was a remarkable group from start to finish throughout this year, and these last 4 games, they really carried Ohio State in a lot of different ways. The moment of the CFP, I fought myself on this one a lot because I thought about that Jeremiah Smith catch a ton. I thought about that one being the one. I think this is the one, if I'm being totally honest. I think this is the moment of the CFP, not necessarily because of the moment, not necessarily because of the game or whatever or anything like that, because of the player, because of the guy that ended up doing it. Jack Sawyer beats Cam Williams clean. He gets to Quinn Ewers, his old roommate, punches it out and runs it back 87 yards. It was a moment that will live on for Ohio State forever. Now, that Jeremiah Smith play will as well, but I think that guy right there, I think Jeremiah Smith has plenty of other plays that will live on in Ohio State history. I think that's the one for Jack Sawyer. I think that's the one that everyone will remember. I think that's the one that a lot of people around Columbus will bring up whenever they see him, and that's the one that will probably be playing on a loop in the Ohio State facility for a very, very long time. This was the heartbeat of this team. This was the guy that gave a ton throughout his career, and it wasn't a perfect career, but this moment was worth everything, I have to imagine. And then obviously moved on, made a number of plays last night, but this feels like the moment in the CFP to me. This feels like the moment where it all became real, where Ohio State fans really felt like we're really going to turn this thing around, from losing to Michigan to winning the national title. And it was the guy that got everyone back in place. It was the guy that got everyone back on this team, and the guy that really put this team in a position to win the national title this year. So to me, that's the moment of the CFP. You could argue the Jeremiah Smith catch, and I would not argue too much with you, but at the end of the day, I think the guy, the moment, and the just energy of that place was just a little bit different when he picked up that ball and went 87 yards to the house. But remarkable CFP. The first time around didn't necessarily go perfectly, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the week, the future of the CFP and how this year kind of educates that decision. But overall, remarkable year and some remarkable performances from some great players. But let's move forward to the all CFP team right after this break. We'll get into all the guys that really stood out in a big time way, all the guys that made number of plays, and obviously it's going to be a lot of Ohio State guys on this, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.